Welcome to the Gita in Action podcast. My name is Radha Priti, and I'm here with a group of seekers, and we are reading through the Bhagavad Gita. And today we are in chapter 3. We just started chapter 3. And just to reorientate everybody a little bit on chapter 3, chapter 3 is called Karma Yoga. So it's the yoga of detached action. And Krishna is going to teach us why detached action is the best. And Arjuna is a little bit confused in this chapter. He's thinking that his options in this battle is either to fight or to renounce and run to the forest. And Krishna is teaching him in this chapter that the options are actually broader than just the two, fight or renounce, that there's actually 5 levels. And we talked about those 5 levels in the last class. We actually kind of talked about it being as a progression from worst to best. But Krishna's really in this chapter, the focus of this chapter is just talking about why detached action is the best. And in that, he'll talk about why the other levels aren't as good. That being said, there's still levels and you can still make spiritual advancement wherever you are. But for the purposes of this chapter and what Krishna is trying to teach, the message is detached action is the way to go. And just to reorientate everybody a little bit on those five levels that we talked about in the last class. And if you missed it, this is episode, I think, 33. And we really hammered down these 5 levels with lots of examples and everything. But it's sinful action, premature renunciation, attached action, mature renunciation, and then detached action. And like I said, we kind of talked about it as a progression, being sinful action being the worst and detached action being the best. And Krishna throughout this chapter is going to use these kinds of levels to further explain why detached action is the best. So we'll go along on that journey with him and Arjuna and learn how we can use this in our own lives as we're going through our own challenges, right? So we're starting with text 3.5. I'll share my screen here. 3.5 says, everyone is forced to act helplessly according to the qualities he has acquired from the modes of material nature. Therefore, no one can refrain from doing something, not even for a moment. So here Krishna is going to talk about what's wrong with giving up action. For the next few verses till 3.8, he's going to talk about why premature renunciation is bad. That's the focus of this. And what he's saying in this verse is that it's impossible to not do anything, right? It's impossible to be completely inactive. Even someone who is paralyzed has a beating heart, right? Complete inactivity is impossible because action is integral to us. It's integral to who we are. In the same way we talked about having desires is a part of our makeup, is a part of this vehicle, right? We can't just be desireless. We can't just be thoughtless, right? It's a part of our nature. And just in that same way, being active is a part of our nature. When we say desireless, it means free from unhealthy desire. In the same way that when we say actionless, it means free from unhealthy action. Right? So some may say that we're active because of our conditioning. Right? And if our conditioning stopped, once we're free of our conditioning, once we're liberated from our material bondage, we'll become inactive. But the Gita says that action is very core to our nature, right? It's our very core nature to be active. And if you remember when we talked about the soul, the symptom of the soul is consciousness. And we talked about how consciousness pervades the whole body. And in that, we're active, right? If we didn't have this consciousness, the symptom of the soul, we would just be like a dead vehicle, just dead matter. But because we have this consciousness, we're inherently active. So if someone is in pain whenever they move, one way to stop the pain is to stop moving, right? But the ultimate solution is to cure whatever is causing the pain, to make them feel pain-free. Right? So in the same way, we're in this disease condition of material bondage. We can say we're in this disease condition because we're attached to these things that we think will make us happy that actually won't make us happy, right? So we could kind of say that's like this illusion. It's kind of like this disease. And we think that maybe by just giving up action, we'll be free from the bondage. But the point here is that we won't, right? Arjuna is thinking this, actually. He's thinking that if he just gives up action, he'll be free from all these feelings that he's having, all these attachments, all these aversions, and he'll just give it up and it won't affect him anymore. But the reality is it will, right? We can't just give up our action and be free from this bondage. Because Krishna is saying that it's actually the inner desires that are leading to action that lead to bondage. And it's the inner desires that we need to purify, right? We can't stop inner desires. We can't be desireless. We can't be actionless, but we can purify both. We can purify our desires and we can purify our action. And in that way, we'll become free from this material disease of material bondage. Right? And just stopping action is not practical because desires will remain. Right? Even if we renounce externally, internally, we're still attached. Right? We're not renounced internally. And in that case, we'll become kind of hypocritical, right? And we certainly won't be free. So like if somebody gives up alcohol, but they're kind of white knuckling it, they're still very much attached, right? They're externally, they may seem renounced, but internally they're not. And in that way, it's not even really sustainable for them. So that's what this verse is saying, that we have to be active. It's our nature. And in that, Krishna is going to further explain how we can use that to evolve our consciousness, to upgrade our consciousness instead of devolve or downgrade our consciousness. So that's 3.5. Okay, we'll go to 3.6 now. This one, there's a lot to talk about. So I'm hoping that we'll get a lot of shares from you guys with this one, because it's a pretty fun one. 3.6 says, one who restrains the senses of action, but whose mind dwells on sense objects, certainly deludes himself and is called a pretender. So here Krishna is saying that if the inner desire is continuing, like we just talked about in the last verse, if the inner desire is continuing, but the outer desire is stopped, or the outer action is stopped, then the person becomes two-faced, right? That's where we become kind of hypocritical. And this is a problem. Being hypocritical is a problem in deceiving others, right? We know that it impacts our relationships in a negative way. And it's, nobody wants to be two-faced. Nobody wants other people to think that they're two-faced, right? But it's an even bigger problem when we're deceiving ourselves, right? It's a problem when we're deceiving others, but it's an even bigger problem when we're deceiving ourselves. Because somebody can think that they've evolved spiritually, but they haven't really. And an example we can talk about, like in our everyday life, we can talk about, imagine someone who dislikes their current job, but they convince themselves that they're satisfied because they're afraid of change or failing. Actually, I think I've been here too, if I'm being honest. I was afraid of taking more responsibility, of failing and what that would mean. And so it was like just kind of staying in a job that I knew wasn't very satisfying. And so what we do is we rationalize our unhappiness by saying, oh, it's not so bad, it's stable, or even, a negative narrative, like I'm not capable of succeeding anywhere else. And over time, this narrative translates into being complacent, right? Missing opportunities for growth, fulfillment, or even like a better work-life balance. Right? And then eventually this will lead to burnout or just feeling deeply unfulfilled, right? But still resisting to acknowledge the root cause, right? They're still trying to kind of push themselves into this square-shaped hole, right? I'm burnt out on my job, Denny says, yes. Well, it's good that you're honest about it. That's good that you're honest about it, because then at least you can confront what your reality is and make an informed decision in that way. So we're talking about people who feel this and are not honest about it. And in that way, they limit themselves, right? They kind of, their growth stops right there, right? They limit even their options of what they can do about it, how they can change it, right? So this what ends up happening is they're limited. If this person, okay, so when this person is doing this to themselves, lying to themselves, this is a big problem because their entire life is affected, right? It's a problem for their colleagues if they act like they like their job and they don't. They might get some judgment or they might get some pity, but they can still privately reflect, plan for change, and seek support without being trapped by their own narratives. So it's much worse to lie to ourselves than lying to others. Not that lying to others is good, but we have to be very careful because it's even where it starts, this root cause. We'll lose opportunities for self-growth, like we just saw in that example. We'll see where this dissatisfaction compounds and the effects of self-deception compound over time, leading to deeper unhappiness, regret, or missed opportunities, right? Or we'll build a life based on self-deception, right? Decisions, it'd be like a weak foundation that we're building on this foundation of self-deception that will eventually all fall over, right? So when we're lying to ourselves, that should be like a flashing red light, right? Like Denny, even if you hate your job, at least you're honest with yourself about it. And if you decide, I have to stay in this job because it's a good paying job, it's, whatever reasons that you decide to stay there, okay, you've made that decision. That's an informed decision. But if you're lying to yourself, you kind of cut all that off. You don't even give yourself the opportunity or the freedom to assess, the opportunity to grow, the opportunity to make a different decision, or to say, okay, I hate it now. It's going to serve me for the next 5 years. And then at that point, you kind of stop your growth right there. So we want to be really careful not to lie to ourselves. And this self-deception can even show up in a form of self-protection, right? Like, for example, I have this samskara of betrayal. Like, I think I've been betrayed a good amount in my life, such that before I would handle this by kind of creating a public image of being like tough or like hard-hearted, right? Or like even like uncaring to protect myself from heartbreak, right? But this also kept me from growing and flourishing. Like I was so concerned about protecting my macho image that I wasn't able to let my guard down and express vulnerability, which kept me from getting close to people. Right? So we can do this even in these kinds of defense mechanisms, which is why this spiritual practice is so important, because what actually got me out of this and able to kind of open my heart up more is realizing, identifying that we're not the body and we're not the mind and kind of the functionality of the ego, and being able to step outside of that a little bit and open our hearts in a way that in a detached kind of way, right? And not completely detached, because that's really difficult, but in a way that's more detached, that if we get some criticism, it's not going to completely crush us, right? Because we kind of know who we are in our relationship to God. And in that way, we build strength and we build a strong foundation. So it's all kind of full circle, right? The way out is the destination where we're going. But this is what can happen if we don't do the work, if we don't recognize some of these things with ourselves, if we can't let go of the fear and the insecurity that grip us tight enough to kind of assess, where am I? And where do I need to grow? What kind of false narratives do I need to evaluate? What's holding me back in life? Where in this relationship am I not really showing up in the way that I should be? Right? Either with myself or with other people. And in that, we, again, at least give ourselves the opportunity to evaluate and to redirect. But if we're not brave or bold enough to even take that step, to even pick up that rock and see what's underneath of it, we're stopped, we're limited, and we may pick up the rock only to say, I'm not ready to address this right now. And that's okay too. It's a progression, but we at least want to be trying to get there. We want to at least be bold enough to just pick it up a little bit, see what's underneath, and decide what we want to do about it and win. Right. This same thing can happen with like moral flaws, right? If like an alcoholic who drinks a lot. Actually, I remember this is my dad. My dad's an alcoholic, and he still is, unfortunately. But every Christmas he switches from drinking whatever he's drinking at that time, either whiskey or beer, to wine, because he says that wine is more biblical. And I remember the first time he told me this, I was a kid. I think I was like in college. And I remember really just feeling so bad for him, because it was evident to me at that point how much he wanted to be like, quote unquote, like normal, like have a healthy relationship, but he just wasn't there. And how he was lying to himself. And what I saw in that was like, gosh, he must be hurting so bad to be lying to himself about what's really going on. Right. Which is also something important for us to remember when we see maybe other people lying to themselves about what's really going on, is it's painful to admit some of these things to ourselves, right? Who wants to admit that they have an unhealthy relationship with alcohol or food or their spouse, right? Or their job, right? That sucks. You have to admit all these things about yourself that you don't want to confront. You don't want to have to deal with. What to speak of, like what you make it mean about yourself, you know? So we have to practice compassion with both ourselves and other people when we see these things, because it's painful. However much we feel affected by the people that we see doing these things, it's even more painful for them, right? So the point is, we need to avoid becoming so dependent on our image that we're hiding ourselves behind it, right? And we need to go beyond the image to building the substance by challenging ourselves and refining appropriately without making it mean anything about ourselves, right? That's where we can sometimes get caught in this, like, in this trap, is if we make it mean something about ourselves. You know, I'm a bad person, I'm a bad mother, I'm a bad spouse, right? We identify so much with our behavior that we can't step away from it to see it for what it really is, so that we can be empowered to change it. And that's the beauty of this practice. That's why we have these spiritual tools, right? So we do this work. We surround ourselves with people who accept us and love us for us. And most of all, we accept ourselves for us, right? And where we are. We know that we're not perfect, right? But we're making progress. And in order to make that progress, we have to be bold enough to pick up those rocks, and compassionate enough with both ourselves and other people in our lives to allow them to do the same, right? Because if we're so judgmental of our partner that they can't express these things to us, that we can't work with them on it, then we're stalling their growth, right? So it's a two-way street. And this compassion, this acceptance, this love, this being able to step away from our material identities, or, you know, these things that, these characteristics of ourselves that we identify with, enough to know that they're not us, and these are just masks that we wear. And we have the ability to change these masks. We can be adaptable. And in that, we can grow spiritually. So I want to hear from you guys. That was a lot of talking on my part. I want to hear what you guys think of that, or how you relate to that. Give it a minute. I see Maria. Are you trying to take yourself off mute, Maria? Great.
Finally got it. Yes, I was having trouble because I was working two part-time jobs for two different companies, and my family was going through just drastic things, and I was really overwhelmed. So I started trying to step down on both jobs. Well, for first the one, and then I was gonna try and get out of the other one too, and it was just all craziness. But the funny thing is that it's not so funny, it's normal, is that Krishna arranged everything to work out perfectly, where I got a little break so that I could do what was needed with my family. And then I can after New Year's, I'm starting back more with the one person who really needs me the most, and it will really help. But anyways, it was just arranged so amazingly.
Mhm. So you're saying that you kind of evaluated where you were in your job and how it was serving you or not serving you in your life, and made a decision about it, which you were, sounds like, kind of unsure of, kind of hesitant about, but
Mhm.
but with your faith and relationship in God, you felt a lot of shelter in that, and things ended up better than you would have even anticipated.
Yeah, everything worked perfectly.
Mm.
And it wasn't because I knew what was going on or how to do it, but I got guided through it.
Mm. And that's such a beautiful point, too. Sometimes when we're scared to take off these masks because we're afraid, sometimes our security is so deep rooted in who we are or what we can do or how our external circumstances are set up around us that we're very attached to. If we can get honest and do something bold that we know doesn't really serve us or suit us anymore, but we don't really know what's on the other side of it, right? That could be sometimes the scariest part, like leaving a job, leaving a relationship, changing a family dynamic that has been with you forever. Like, how is this going to affect? What's this going to look like on the other side? Right. But if we can really hold on to that relationship with Krishna and find shelter in that, oftentimes in my experience, and it sounds like yours too, it's so much better than what we could have even planned for if we were trying to control,
Mhm.
the other side of it. Right. Because
Yeah.
it's like all we can do in that moment is be honest about where we are and where we're not. And we don't necessarily know what that even means for the other side. And we don't even have control over it, right? Like we
Mhm.
leave this relationship. Am I going to find another good one? Am I going to find one that's better? Am I going to find one that's worse? But all we could do is just be honest with where we are and trust in Krishna that things will arrange in such a way that for our benefit. And if we're sincere, they will. If we're sincere and that's what we really desire, they will arrange for your benefit without a doubt. It might not be exactly, what you wanted, or it might not even be in the direction of like more pleasant or more pleasurable, but in the long run, it will be for your benefit, and there'll be a time where you'll see it like that to the degree that we're sincere. So that's such a nice point. Thank you. Would anyone else like to share on this? Karina, please share
Yeah,
with
I
us.
think I may have spoken about this before, but it's very true to what we're speaking about. When I moved to Atlanta from Scotland, I'd been teaching yoga in a certain way for 20 years. And over the last 10 years, it was very much, bringing in some bhakti and doing group chanting and things. But when I moved to America, it was not accepted well to begin with. In fact, a couple of people approached me and said, please don't ask us to chant. We don't do chanting in this studio. And now that it's my studio, because we bought it over, I just took a decision one day that I might lose some of my students, but if I stayed true to myself and because I come to life when I talk about Krishna and
Mm,
Bhakti and chanting. And if that means my class is only a third full, then that's the third that want to be there and hear it. So I think, yeah, from everything I got from what you were saying is just be true to yourself, trust, just keep going, even though sometimes you feel they don't like me, they just want to do power yoga, you will find your tribe and everything works out as it's planned and intended to when you just stay true to your heart.
mm. Wow, that's so beautiful and so true. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And because as long as you're living in that place where you're not being totally authentic or true, those are the experiences and the people that you're going to attract, and it's just going to be compounded. This facade that you've created of yourself, it's just going to be compounded and harder to get out of, because without you even knowing it, like you said, that's exactly what you're attracting, and it's not so congruent with who you are, but you feel stuck in it. Right. Yeah. I remember when I was just starting this podcast, somebody gave me this advice to not be afraid to be yourself, and that whoever you are, it would just attract people that could connect with that. And you didn't have to worry about trying to be, right? You just be. And I remember feeling so relieved, like, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense, because to the degree that you're trying, you're one, inauthentic, and you're two, attracting a tribe that jives with that, which isn't necessarily bad. But if you're not authentic, then you're again limiting yourself in your growth and your authenticity, and and that comes off even, that's not even as that doesn't even come off as sincere. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Trevor, I was waiting for you to raise your hand, Trevor. It's been a while since we've heard from you.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about a couple things here. I like in this passage, that it says a man can't even maintain his physical body without work. So regardless of how still you're trying to be, vibration is like our bare essence. We can't help but to be moving no matter how still we are. And I like how this book teaches you how to be creative with everything from the inside to the outside, because it's like, don't shame yourself for having symptoms of anger or whatever comes up. It has nothing to do with your development. What does is if it's controlling you or not, and how you use it, and are you using it to make progress internally? Are you using these emotions to serve Krishna, or are you controlled by your material sense gratification? And then on the outside that reflects your inside, it's like everything, like your materials and including the circumstances that are organized for you, are for your soul purification process. It's nothing separate. There's nothing separate from that. So it's like premature renunciation is a lot of what people go through before they personalize their relationship with Krishna. A lot of times you'll see like the people that are creating this spiritual ego for themselves, they're like so focused on renouncing everything they have and minimalizing their living situations. And you see on TV the tiny homes and people just renouncing into the forest prematurely and whatnot, and I'm glad I got to these scriptures, because it shines so much awareness on that. It's like it's actually forbidden in this age to do stuff like that, and it's offensive to God and the universe to renounce from facility that's being provided for you for your service and for your soul purification.
Wow. That was so nicely said. I love the point where you said, and I saw Maria shaking her head too. I love the point where you said premature renunciation is what people do before they personalize their relationship with Krishna. Right? It's when we're still very much stuck in the ego. We're still very much attached to what we like and what we don't like. And we decided to go to run away from it. And so that we don't have to deal with it, basically. And in that, we're making it about ourselves, and we're not really in it for the service of Krishna. And that's so beautiful. That was really nicely said. Thank you, Trevor.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go on. Does anyone else want to share before we go on? Okay, we'll go on 3:7. 3:7 says, on the other hand, if a sincere person tries to control the active senses by the mind and begins karma yoga without attachment, he is by far superior. So this is again a contrast being drawn between a person who has premature renunciation and a person who is doing responsible work with regulated senses. Krishna is saying this is much better. So this is where Krishna is splitting renunciation into two distinct levels. A premature renunciation, which we've talked about quite a bit, and mature renunciation, which has not yet been talked about, but we'll talk about it later. We talked about it a little bit yesterday in episode 33. We talked about mature renunciation, but Krishna will talk about it more in the later chapters, or in the later text of this chapter. So here he's saying action is better than premature renunciation. And he's saying a person who is regulated and works is better than a person who just pretends to renounce, but is still attached mentally, right? Because they're not even working on themselves. They've pretty much come to a halt in their growth and in their spiritual growth and evolution. But if you can regulate and work, then you can at least make some progress, right? So we consider we have the sense objects, the senses, and the mind all in a row, right? Somebody who's prematurely renounced would put a barrier between the senses and the sense objects, right? If they're externally renounced, they put a barrier right between the senses and the sense objects. But instead, the mind then is dwelling on the sense objects. So you're not partaking in the sense objects, you're not engaging your senses to the sense objects, but your mind is still dwelling on them, right? This is premature renunciation. This is unhealthy. But in contrast with that, if both the mind and the senses are disciplined by the mind, right? If the mind is disciplining the senses, then there's regulated engagement between the senses and the sense objects. So we have to kind of refine that relationship between the mind and the senses and the sense objects. We want to regulate the senses with the mind. And in that, there can be some regulated engagement. And this is the better way. This is the way of growth, right? Because if one is regulated, gradually someone will rise to realization, and then from realization to renunciation afterwards. So that's the process, that's the path of action, right? Regulation, realization, renunciation. Regulation, to engage in moderate ways, will lead to realization where we realize that what we thought we needed or what we thought we were attached to, maybe we're not so much. And then in that way, eventually we'll be able to give it up completely. Right? An example would be like somebody who's taking drugs. Somebody who's taking like hard drugs, right? And they get off and they start to have really intense withdrawal pains. So regulation would maybe mean decreasing the amount of the drug that they take. And if cold turkey is like nearly impossible. So from that, we realize when we get into this regulated mood with this drug, we realize that there's so many better things that we could do, right? And we realize that I don't have to give myself up completely to this. So from there, we get to this place of renunciation where we say, you know, I can give myself up completely. But it's incremental. It's not just like a light switch. We regulate, we get this realization, and then we can get to this place of renunciation that's mature. The same thing we could practice with a job, right? Like, so say this process of regulation, realization, renunciation, say like a successful corporate executive realizes that their career is taking a toll on their health and relationships. And so they begin to set boundaries, right? By working fewer hours, taking vacations, prioritizing time with family. And from there, they realize as they create more balance, they get to the stage of realization and they realize that their focus on career and wealth has led to neglecting their personal happiness, right? They get a little bit of glimmer of that happiness that they have from taking time for themselves. And they realize that what they were doing before didn't really feel so good. And they understand that their constant pursuit of success has been hollow and unsustainable. So this regulation leads to these realizations. And then with this insight, the executive can renounce their overattachment to career success. Right? They can scale back on their ambitions. They can pursue work that aligns more with their values and dedicate more time to relationships and personal growth and seeking a more fulfilled and balanced life. But it takes that, that incremental process so that they can be in a space where they can have those realizations. Because if we don't do that, if we don't use this process of regulation, realization, renunciation, there'll be contemplation, right? We'll be contemplating on what it is that we desire. If we try to just go cold turkey, this desire will still exist in the mind because we won't have given ourselves that opportunity to realize that maybe we're better without it, right? In a regulated, peaceful way, right? So this contemplation, this external renunciation, this unregulated external renunciation combined with this contemplation is a recipe for disaster, right? Because the contemplation, the desires will be growing and growing and growing, and eventually there'll be a relapse. Right? Like really strict diets work like this, right? Like if you have an unhealthy relationship with food, and you can acknowledge that, okay, I have an unhealthy relationship with food. So you say, okay, I'm only going to eat healthy things. I'm not going to eat any processed sugar, anything fried. You make this like super strict diet. But in the meantime, you're not really working on dealing with the reason that you have this unhealthy relationship with food. Like you're lonely, you're bored, it's the emotional hunger, right? You're not really dealing with that. You're just trying to externally renounce it. And we all know what happens when you do. If anybody has an unhealthy relationship with food, right here, we all know what happens when we try to be like super stringent with ourselves, right? We have a little relapse. We give into our craving and we say, okay, I'll do better tomorrow. But eventually we just relapse back into our old behavior and we kind of give up all of those stringent regulation or those stringent rules that we were following. And we don't make any progress at all. Right. So that's why this incremental approach is better. Maybe coming up with some guidelines for healthier lifestyle, healthier relationship with food, and then also trying to address what the culprit is behind it. And in that way, we can progress to the stage of realization and real renunciation. What do you guys think about that? Does anybody want to share anything about that? It's progression. Because if a child has a toy and he breaks and he cries, we can't tell a child not to cry. But once the child becomes an adult, the child won't cry when the toy breaks. But we can't force the child to respond in the way that an adult would, right? We have to let him kind of naturally grow there, naturally progress there, right? The artificial claim of growth is unhealthy. And that's how we have to treat ourselves. Right? We can't push ourselves to be somewhere that we want to be by just trying to white knuckle it or just creating this barrier between your senses and your sense objects. That's just not sustainable. We have to recognize where we are. We have to be bold enough to lift that rock up, uncover it, and then we have to do the necessary work to try to take these incremental steps to invoke change in our lives, right? Create some regulations and work towards it, to really realizing it. And there's a difference too between knowing it and realizing it, right? Like I know I have an unhealthy relationship with food, but actually realizing it inside my body and what that means and what that feels like and how that manifests, right? We have to get there. Body, mind, soul, we aligned. We have to, it's a progression. And there's no way to fake it or like, quick. It's not like a quick thing that we can do. Because that's part of our experience. That's part of the human conditioned being experience. Trevor, do you want to share something with us?
Yeah. I realized I shared a quote from a passage that's ahead of us, and I always do that. I don't know why. I turned the page and thought we were there. My bad. But the renunciation of addictive substances is a good topic because everyone can relate to it in one way or another, because it starts in your mind. You have these desires, and if you want to break free from the vices of the material world, these methods, like Karina said, chanting, yogic procedures, scriptures, group talks like this, these forms of meditation encourage your spiritual growth. They really and the scriptures also encourage you that it's a gradual strength building process. Like, give yourself time to grow, basically. Don't embrace the step you're on, basically. If you still are too strongly attached to something, give yourself time. Add these methods of meditation into your life and then see what it does for you, because your soul is going to get stronger. Your spiritual development is going to manifest. And through that, as a byproduct, you're naturally going to want to let go of certain things that are holding you down on a lower vibration, because this is lifting your vibration up. And naturally, you're going to want to do anything it takes to maintain those higher vibrations at a consistency, so those vices of a lower nature lose their strength over your actions and whatnot. And it happened to me. It happened to my mother. There's levels to it. And I like how you brought that up, because it helps me remember what I went through whenever I was making drastic transitions and whatnot. And if it wasn't for the chanting and these different powerful and effective forms of meditation, coming in contact with the superior energy, as Prabhupada would say, I would have had no chance to give anything up or make any nice essential changes. And for example, whenever I went vegan, I didn't just go vegan. I went vegetarian first for a year and slowly transitioned into cutting dairy out too. But it's just an example of how there's levels inside of it. And even whenever you go vegan, so to say, there's levels inside of that too. Like you're learning so much about, like you said, processed sugary. If you're figuring out like what's being put into stuff and how things are being made and all that. There's an awakening through each department of your life. I think diet is a very tough subject for a lot of people, but it is like your backbone, and it can really strengthen your situation, your stance, and this spiritual approach to life.
Yeah. I love how you said how you kind of, your message is to not be discouraged if we're not where we think we should be or where we want to be, and understand that it is natural. The natural progression of this machine is that these things don't happen overnight, and that it is an incremental process. That's just how we're built. And so if you're not where you want to be, you're in good company. Like that's where we all are, right? We're all working towards these places. You know, we all are aspiring to be more compassionate, more patient with our children, with our spouses, with, you know, all these things that we all struggle with on a daily basis. We're all working to get there. And the worst thing we can do to ourselves is beat ourselves up about not being where we think we should be or where we want to be, right? Because that can actually have the opposite effect. That can bring us lower. Right? And that's not where we want to be. We want to be able to recognize, like, okay, I didn't show up as my highest self there. I'm going to give that another try. I'm going to take some time. I'm going to, like you said, meditate, chant, reconnect, and then I'm going to give that another try. And just hope that each time we can make a little bit of progress. And that's the best we can do. And we cannot just wake up. We can't just hear this class and then say, okay, I'm inspired. I'm going to show up 4:0 tomorrow and the next day and the next day. No, it's not the way it works, right? It's hopefully we're making this linear progress, but it's a journey. And that's a symptom of these machines that we're in. Yeah, let's see. Karina says something here on the chat. I say this when teaching yoga poses. It's all incremental practice makes progress. Yeah, exactly. That's such a nice thing about the yoga asana that we can see on the mat. You know, we can't just show up and do a handstand. It takes time to get there. And in the process, that's really where the work is. Yeah, thank you.
I like how you put that, because if you try to do too much too soon, you get discouraged. It's like, I can't do this. You know what I mean? It's just focus a little bit at a time.
Yeah.
That's key, you know?
Yeah, be where you are and be comfortable with that, but at the same time, maybe try to level up a little bit every day, but just a little bit, not so much that you're going to break yourself, but just a little bit. Yeah. The Gita says that a sincere sweeper in the street is far better than the meditator who meditates only for the sake of making a living. Right? So if we, whatever we're doing, if we can do it with sincerity and we're, in this pointed towards the right direction being selfless service to God, then we're doing, that's the work. We're doing better than, maybe somebody that appears to be there, but is really not there. So let's do one more verse for the day. Anybody has anything else they want to share? We'll do 3:8. Perform your prescribed duty, for doing so is better than not working. One cannot even maintain one's physical body without work. So I think this is the verse you were referring to earlier, right, Trevor? Where we say it's impossible. By nature, we always act, right? We can't not act, right? It's unsustainable. We can't sustain not acting. It can't sustain us, right? The way that the world works, it's arranged. We can't survive without doing some work, right? Some work is essential. And when we work, we maintain ourselves. In society, there's leaders, workers, freeloaders, right? But everybody needs to contribute in some way or another, some smaller and some bigger. And if too many people don't contribute, the social fabric weakens and the social structure can be destroyed. And in addition to that, the body requires maintenance, activity. Activity is essential. And we grow by acting. So we have to act. And the Gita says that working to our prescribed duty gradually cleanses the heart and frees one from material contamination. And this you can think of as being congruent with that regulation, realization, renunciation from the last verse. If we're engaged and we're regulating, it leads to these realizations that, maybe I'm overly attached to my career or my success in this way, or maybe I'm making this relationship, maybe my ego is kind of overstepping in this relationship, right? We kind of lead to those realizations, which leads to actually mature renunciation. But that's how we have to get there. And we have to work to our duty. We have to put the work in to cleanse the heart, to get free from this material contamination. And as the Gita says, as long as we have some attachment to sense gratification, we should work in the material world. And my thought is, I know I still have sense gratification, so that's where I am. And my thought is that's where we all are. If somebody's not, that's amazing. But I think most of us have some level of attachment to sense gratification, and therefore we have to work in this material world to release ourselves from that, to get to this place of realization, so that we can actually renounce in a healthy way that we all, would aspire to, not a premature way when we're not quite there yet. We haven't quite gotten to those realizations. Does anybody want to share anything here? I have one more verse, but it's kind of long, so I'm not sure if we'll have time today. I think I might save it for the next, because it's kind of long and I want to be able to do it justice. But does anybody want to share any reflections from today's class? Or Trevor, please share.
Yeah, I want to say something about that last quote, as about a man cannot even maintain his physical body without work. That's so powerful. Like, it helps you to realize that every day you're gonna have to step up. You're gonna have to step it up. We have two choices: either lay there and die, or get up and step up to whatever circumstances manifest in your life. And whenever you're sleeping for too long, or so to say, you're laying there for too long, your neck gets so stiff. We have these physical responses, and it's like you become like a 2x4. You start turning into your bed itself whenever you're laying there. So you have no choice to either act upon your in your life, or lay there and die, basically. Become dead matter. So it's that quote really is fascinating to me, and it helps you to remember how much work it requires just to get through your day. It's like you're gonna have to do something, so you might as well come at it with some enthusiasm. Know that you're gonna have to put in some effort in order to create harmony for yourself and whatnot. The idea, though, is to align your desires with God's gradually. That way the action that takes place is a little easier, whatnot.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah. No, it's such a good point too, that, also for us to kind of refine our definition of spirituality, and that it's not just that time that we have that we're chanting or we're singing in kirtan, or, we're in association with like-minded people and we feel so uplifted and inspired. Like, that's important and that fuels us. But spirituality, again, it starts when you get into your car and the first time you get cut off in traffic, right? How are we going to handle that? Or how are we going to handle this disagreement with our spouse, or this problem at work, right? How are we going to show up in a way to upgrade our consciousness? How are we going to show up in a more authentic way, a way that's more congruent to our true natures, right? And in a way that we can start to strip these masks off that we hid behind for so long to define us, so that we can reveal what's actually going on, so that we can start to make some progress. And then in that progress, that's where we find that connection, with that stronger connection with God. And I love how you brought that into it too. It's such an important element, is this attitude, this mindset of trying to serve God in our everyday lives, in our actions, whatever we're doing. How can we do it in a way to please God a little bit more? Right? How can we try to be a little bit more selfless? How can we try to get our ego out a little bit? How can we acknowledge where we see those attachments and aversions affecting our lives in a way that isn't serving us, or isn't serving our highest calling, and correct, refine, without getting too stuck in the gunk of it all, right? Without making it about us, without getting stuck in, these loopholes of insecurity and doubts and self-criticism, right? Just step away from the vehicle, see it for what it is, and do the maintenance work that's required to get it up and running again to our final destination. So thank you. Thanks, Trevor. Thanks for that share. Would anyone else like to share before we
You're
end
welcome.
for the
Thank
day?
you.
Oh, it's nice. It's nice to hear your shares again, Trevor. Would anyone else like to share before we end for the day? Okay. Well, we will be right back here on Thursday to continue going through this chapter of Karma Yoga, the yoga of detached action. Thank you all so much for being here, and look forward to seeing you all soon.
Thank you, Warren.
Thank you. So sweet.